Hey, this is Nick from Jenga FX, and we are going to get started with LiquiGen today. This is going to be the LiquiGen live training, and I'm going to go over how to use LiquiGen. So we're going to talk about emitters, colliders, drains, how do you add white water to your simulation, how do you use the new viscosity, and so on. So there's a lot of different things that we're going to go over today, and let's go ahead and get started. The first 5 minutes or so, we're just going to be about the general viewport, and then from there, we're going to dive into what are all of these nodes, how do I use them. So the very first thing is up here, we have a little home button, just like all of our other tools. And if you want to view your most recent projects, you can find them here. If you want a number of different things to start from, so say a large waterfall, small splash, or a small trickle, we can open this and see how that is. So we can see that this is about 10 centimeters, maybe 20 centimeters in total width here. So a very small simulation. If we go to the medium splash, we can see that this is a couple of meters. And then if we go to the large waterfall, we can see that this is probably 20 meters tall or something like that. So this is absolutely gigantic. And so we've given you a couple of different starting points to start from inside of LiquiGen. For general presets, there's a preset button over here, and you can go through and click on all of these different presets, and these all have different cool simulations in them. So whether it's, say something like toothpaste viscosity, let me turn off the domain. Don't know why it's on. So you can do stuff like high viscosity simulations. You can do, splatters for like a video game flip book and some other things. So there's a lot of cool stuff that you can go in here. I will let you look through all of this on your own time. My primary goal today is to teach you how you can go through and create stuff like this on your own. So let's go ahead and just say new project. And so this right here is the default viewport. If you want to access diagnostics, which you can see here, there's a little water droplet icon that's going to give you diagnostics. That's going to allow you to see things like, say, the bounding box, the sparse tiles. If you want to see, say, liquid particles instead of the liquid mesh, you can see that. You can change how they render. You can change their size and all kinds of different stuff to kind of go through and debug your simulation. There's also cool stuff like, say, previewing the velocity of the water, which I think is quite interesting and cool. And so, for instance, if I come over here and look, you can see that there's a bunch of little arrows kind of denoting, what direction the liquid is going in and things like that. And so you can normalize the arrows, change the size, and all kinds of other stuff. So there's a lot of ways to kind of come in and debug your simulations. And I will also let you explore the vast majority of this on your own time. But one other thing that I will mention is under the Models tab, if you find that, say, your liquid is going through a model, so let me see if I can actually bring a model in real quick. And then we'll do, say, maybe collider, and then we'll do show SDF. And so now we can actually see the signed distance field of this hot dog. And we can see that there is some kind of like little gap thing there and so on. But this right here is a good way to kind of go through and tune your model to make sure that water or any kind of liquid isn't going to leak through it. So this right here is a great way to kind of debug your models. If you're like, hey, why isn't my glass, holding a liquid? It's probably because there's gaps inside of the signed distance field, and you can go through and tweak the resolution of that signed distance field with this relative resolution inside of the import node. Other than that, let me look back at my notes. So, and that is the diagnostics panel. We have a number of different things that you can view. So we do have like a path tracer view. So if you want to see more realistic reflections, you want to see caustics and things like that, that is what the actual path tracer is going to do. And if you want to find path tracer settings, that's going to be over here inside of your render node after scene. If you don't want to use the denoiser and you want to just see all the raw path trace data, you can see that. You can see some caustics and things starting to take effect. And we have like varying amounts of photons that you can cast through this and so on. I'm gonna turn the path tracer off because it kills performance and might hurt the stream. But that is kind of how you do path tracing. You can also go through and say, I want to see shapes or I don't. I want to see the liquid mesh or I don't. I want to see white water or I don't, so on and so forth. So there's various view options there. The next thing, and we actually found out that people never knew that this tab existed. It exists in both Embergen and LiquiGen. And this preview tab allows you to go through and see how different passes are going to look. So in this case, we're seeing the path tracer, which clicking that significantly slows down the software. Unfortunately, my software is locking up. Uh-oh. Geez. All right. Let's try again. Preview. Can I change it? Maybe not. Okay, this is so buggy. Uh-oh. I can't actually click out of this. I broke the scene. All right. Somebody on the dev team write down that note because the software is locking up, unfortunately. I can't even exit out of this. Damn it, boy. All right. I'm going to have to task manager out of this, I think. Let's see. Of course, LiquiGen does this. Let's see. Can I actually do anything here? Bum, bum, bum. I can't even find it in the task manager. Okay, in task. Oh my God, I don't want to save, just crash. All right. Cool. Look at that, crash to desktop. Fantastic. All right, so let me try that again. New project, preview. I just won't click any path trace stuff. So you can preview things like, say, the alpha, the diffuse channel. You can preview reflect, refract. We also have a new thing that we added for thickness. So we had a bunch of people saying, "Hey, can you please, give us like a thickness pass for the liquid?" So if you want to, render maybe some fake subsurface scattering and things like that inside of your game engine, this is a great way to do that. We also have super sampling on this particular one. You can do like, say, the transmission of the liquid, emission, and so on and so forth. So there's a bunch of different passes that you can export now. So if you do a lot of compositing and things like that, we have a lot of different passes, and you can preview all those down here. Just beware of this render all path trace because it completely locks up your whole computer. So I would be wary of that right this second. Looking back at my notes, that's pretty much it with the viewport. Of course, if you want to interact with objects, you have to click a node, and then you can kind of go through and interact with them with the gizmos. If you want to rotate around, you have to hold Alt and left click. This is different than the current Embergen because we changed the camera controls. And then we do have zoom to cursor. And so you can see that we have like a little cross wherever my mouse is. And so it's kind of bad, like if you say go over here, because then it's going to zoom in on that area. But one thing that it does allow you to do is kind of fine tune control where, say, I want to zoom in on this particular water droplet, I can do that. And it works, kind of no matter what your scale is. And so that's pretty neat. If you don't like it, you can always come in and turn it off. You can change all the camera controls as a matter of fact. So we have different control mapping schemes. So, it's say industry compatible, 3ds Max, Blender, Cinema 4D, Houdini, Maya, etc. So you can kind of come in and do all that kind of stuff if you want to. So we have a lot of different control mapping options. And then if you want to turn off pivot to cursor, that is this option right there. And you can also change like your orbit direction and just tons and tons and tons of stuff. How sensitive is everything? There's many camera controls to make it your own if you want to do that. So going into, say, our node graph. So to actually make a simulation, there's a few things that you need. So for instance, we don't need any of this stuff. The only thing we really need is, say, a shape primitive, which is going to tell us where are we going to emit from. We need an emitter, which is going to say how much liquid am I going to emit at any given time. We have a simulation node, which is going to say, how many voxels can I have in my simulation? What amount of resources am I going to dedicate to my VRAM? So like right now, I'm using 4.37 gigabytes of VRAM right this second. So that's going to tell me that kind of stuff. You also have things like tuning your solver. So if, say, I lower my pick flip ratio to, say, basically 0, the liquid's going to kind of become more viscous it's less splashy and things like that. But then if I increase this, you can see that we have a lot more splatters and splashes. And so this is kind of like an artificial viscosity, and it kind of switches between a flip solver and a pig solver. Um, that's kind of what that does. You can also simulate something like, say, particle lifetime. And so if you go into the emitter, you can actually determine, how long is a particle going to live for. And so, at least so I thought. Let's see, simulate particle lifetime, emitter. Bum, bum, bum. Lifetime range. Okay, here we go. And so we're like, right now the particles will live between 0 seconds and 5 seconds. And so as they go out, they're actually going to go out here and die. And in this case, if you run into a situation like this where it says, the maximum amount of voxels has been reached, please increase the limit in the simulation node. So that's just saying that you need to go to your resources tab. You've kind of maxed out the maximum number of voxels that you could do. And so, I might come in and do, say, 10 million particles, 20 million triangles or so on. And that's going to give you enough. And you can see that it's only using 6.3 gigabytes of VRAM. And so, but in general, it's kind of bad practice to just let liquid go all the way out here. You may want to do things like, say, increase the stickiness of the liquid so that it actually pulls up a bit more and kind of has like a surface tension effect on the ground. And so that's something that you may want to take into consideration. Going into viscosity, I'll touch on that later. We also have things like, say, surface tension. So if you want the liquid to have a lot more surface tension, so say, it kind of bundles up and turns into little droplets and things like that. So say if I turn off my gravity, you can see that it's turning into a sphere here. But if I kind of lower this back down to, let's just say 0, it's not really going to adhere to itself. It's going to become noisy and so on as all those particles kind of die out. Going into pressure, the way to think about pressure is it prevents unnecessary, my voice is cracking, it prevents unnecessary expansion and compression of the liquid. And so that's also going to ensure that it properly splashes and doesn't become like squishy. And so, for instance, if I come in and I turn my stuff back on here, and then, we turn our pressure down to 0, you can see that the liquid does almost nothing. It's just completely collapsing. It's not splashing. It's not keeping any of the velocity that it had. And so by increasing your pressure iterations, it's going to become more accurate, right? It's going to, do more realistic splashes. It's going to resist compression of the liquid more, and that's kind of what this is. And then we have a solver tuner. And though I don't quite have the training on it yet from my team, as far as I understand, if you can get a smooth curve that kind of goes down, that's going to be the most finely tuned solver for your particular setup that you have. And so it kind of goes through. And so something like this is bad with this kink in it because it kind of shows that we have too much or rather not enough, like over relaxation. And so something like this is probably the most optimal curve. And then you can see our error is going to a pretty low value. And so you can see that, like, as I lower my iterations, the error becomes larger. And as I increase my iterations, it becomes smaller. So this right here is just kind of a way to check for the accuracy of your simulation if you like to get into like ultra technical stuff. But that's one of the things that we use for debugging our sims. Density is basically the mass per volume for the liquid. So as far as I understand, 997 is the proper mass for water. You could go in and do it for blood or milk or goo or whatever it is that you're trying to simulate. I do believe that this actually coincides with real world values. So if you have them, you can go in and put those numbers in. Hopefully one day we can have like presets for various liquid types and that kind of thing. But for instance, this liquid simulation is rather large. And so if I just hop up to viscosity for a second, you'll see that if I come here, turn on viscosity, nothing's happening. We don't have any, curling, we don't see any like gel-like behavior. There's no buckling of the liquid or anything. That's because we have to go into our emitter. And if we change the dynamic viscosity, you can see that it's still not really doing anything. And that's because this is absolutely massive for a liquid. Like, this is a gigantic simulation. And so we have one of two options. We could go in and inside of our simulation, we can lower the voxel size to say like 0.005 or something like that. or you can lower the density, right? So basically, viscosity, surface tension, things like that, those are various forces. And if you have a small box and a big box, a small box is easier to push theoretically than a large box. And so right now, this is a very large box versus a small box. And so it takes a lot more force. And so your typical values are not going to create something viscous at a scale like this. But if you want to cheat it and hack it, let's say we just do something arbitrary like zero point 0.2. Now this is going to come down and it is a very, very viscous liquid, right? And you can see the particles fading out because we are simulating lifetime. And so if I come through and I do something, a lot smaller, maybe like this, you can kind of see that this is just kind of squirting out, little pieces of gel or something like that. And if I turn off my lifetime and we let this actually just kind of stack up, you can kind of see what it's doing. Going through this a little bit more, we do have, say, high quality meshing as well. And so you'll notice that if we come here, if we turn it to low quality, everything's just jagged and it doesn't particularly look good, but it is very performant and it is an approximation of your mesh. But if we choose higher quality meshing, we can kind of tune this up a little bit. So maybe we'll say increase the dilation a little bit, make sure that we get some good particles. We can do a number of smoothing operations on this particular mesh. And then I think that maybe this looks good. This looks like a nice, good gel or something like that. And so we can kind of come through, increase the radius of my emitter. And now you can see that we've got some of that, that coiling. We've got maybe a little bit of buckling and things. And so if we change this to say something like a box, and we did maybe like 0 0.2 in Y, and then we expanded on my X, you can see, hopefully, that this will start buckling. And we can kind of enforce, things in viscosity to happen a little bit better if we increase, say, the iterations and such. So let's go over here. We're going to kind of lower some of these values. And now you can see that we're getting a little bit more of like a curling effect by having higher iterations. We can look at the solver tuner. And so we can kind of go over here and we can say, okay, what is, over relaxation doing? We know that, getting values to go down here is better. And so we can just kind of tune this a little bit. And then one thing that I have noticed is that, the viscosity and pressure iterations will kind of change dynamically. So you can see we're only using 11% of the iterations. And so if you notice, it says the solver can stop early if the target divergence is reached. So basically the simulation is going to try and optimize itself as best as it can. And so that's a pretty good way to just kind of look at stuff. And you can see that this is becoming quite viscous based on the higher iterations and parameters and stuff that I've set. And of course, the amount of liquid also matters. So if I come here and I do maybe like 0.05 or something, it's going to have a much higher, I guess, propensity to actually kind of coil and buckle because there's less liquid and mass and stuff to move around. So kind of the smaller and thinner your streams, the more of a viscous look you're going to get. So that's just kind of a quick tip for you. Going into, say, colliders now. So let's say if I wanted to add a collider to the simulation, that's pretty much the gist of the simulation node itself. Most of this stuff is pretty self-explanatory. If you hover over stuff, we have some really good tooltips. And then you just got to kind of play with it to make things out. But like I said, density is probably the most important thing here. High values of density like 997 for like water, it's really only going to work if you have a super small scale, which would be pretty cool. We do not have a viewport FPS monitor, Lorenzo. We've removed it for some reason, but I would like it back. And so, but I would estimate that this is, you can look at my frame counter down here at the bottom. And so, I mean, this is probably like 30 frames or something per second, I would estimate. And so kind of going through here, that's pretty much it. We do, of course, have liquid appearance, so you can choose, say plastic or gold or iron or copper and so on. And so this right here is us kind of prepping and getting ready for more of like a PBR type texture workflow. So in the future, when we have things like say UV advection, you can have PBR textures that you're advecting on it. So say lava or something like that, and actually advect PBR textures and then render those out with our renderer. If you're doing something like importing a camera and then you want holdouts and things like that. So if you don't want to render the liquid somewhere else, you want to render it here. We're trying to get closer to real life values and stuff like that. So that's pretty neat. But going back to the collider thing, all you have to do is just drag off. You can add a collider node by clicking collider, and then you add a shape, and then that's going to give us a shape to collide with. So I'm just going to kind of increase the radius, press R to restart the sim, space bar will play. You do not have to come down here, wherever it is, like here. You don't have to click this little button constantly to reset. You can just press R on your keyboard. And so now you can kind of see that this right here is actually colliding. We can come in, we can, move the collider. The simulation in this version of LiquiGen is much, much more stable. It tends usually to not explode. Sometimes it does explode, but it tends to not explode. And you can see that if you want some kind of like chocolate or something like that, you can do that. I do wonder if I have stickiness. I do. I am kind of surprised that the liquid just kind of bounces off that instead of sticking onto it. But that may be due to the level of viscosity and stuff that I have. It's not really going to stick very well because it's bundling into its own bundle, I think. That's probably what's happening there. One thing I will note as well, besides the collider stuff, is you can have like dynamic viscosity. You can have a dynamic stickiness and so on. Somebody says, is this running with a 4090? It is running with an RTX 6000. So this is a pretty beefy graphics card, but it actually performs a little bit worse than a 4090. And so a 4090 would perform a little bit better than this. So with things like dynamic values, the dynamic values that we do allow are, say, lifetime over range, stickiness, and your viscosity coefficient. And so, for instance, if I come up here, and by the way, also you can change your viscosity coefficient too if you want more coiling and buckling. So if I change this to something like 100,000, it is really, really, really going to try and stay together as like a solid piece of liquid. Now we can't do like full like NPM solver stuff just yet, with like snow or, something keeping it shaped like an ice cube and then melting. But we can kind of simulate something like that by changing this over time. And so if I come here and then I choose this to be, say, 0, now you can see that we have a completely non-viscous liquid interacting with the viscous particles. And I believe if we go to the diagnostics panel, we can preview field and let's see if I actually can. I cannot recall, but I'm just looking because I think that maybe you can preview a full field of this stuff. Let's see, models, velocity, source, domain. I thought that there was a way for me to actually preview the viscosity itself. Let's see, field, main, wave crest, show normals, trapped air. Field viscosity. Okay, so it's on the liquid particles, not the liquid mesh. And then we can come here. And so a low viscosity is going to be black in this particular case. And this right here is like a really, really large range. So let's go to like 10,000. And so we can say, do that, pause it, and then we increase this value. And then now it's going to be white. We can lower it. And so then we can see the variable viscosity of these actual particles. So that's going to be in liquid particles, diagnostics tab. You choose field, viscosity, and then you can change your color space. So we can kind of come in here and look at how, that liquid is mixing with kind of the dynamic viscosity. Now, unfortunately, one thing that we can't do just yet, this is something that we're going to add here in the near future, is being able to change, say, these particles over their life and change its viscosity so that you can have, say a goo, and then maybe it like heats up and then it turns into like a full, non-viscous liquid or something like that. So That kind of stuff is coming. Like Lorenzo says, can you use something like an activator to change the viscosity based on what it touches? Not yet, but that kind of thing is coming. So that would be like our fully dynamic particles and things. And so that's pretty interesting whenever we get that in. That would be definitely super cool. Then going into, say, drains, right? So we kind of, and I'll touch on forces later as well, but drains, what they do is they just kill particles once they reach a certain point. And so in this case, you can see I have a sphere. If I click drain, I can actually show it. And so anything that touches this sphere, those particles are going to be killed. Usually what you would want to do is maybe you want to contain and stop all these little stray particles. So you would say invert the shape. Now you can see that everything is dying because anything outside of this interior radius is going to be killed. And so we can come up and choose this. And now if particles reach those outside bounds, we're going to keep our simulation performant. We're not going to have to deal with any meshing outside of this sphere and so on. So this right here is a pretty neat way to ensure performance, ensure that you don't have a bunch of stray particles go everywhere. It's just kind of a good practice to do so that you're not wasting a bunch of resources on your sim and things like that. So putting up drains is pretty good. I'm going to turn off viscosity for the whitewater portion. And then let's go to my, say, stickiness. I'm going to do 100%. I'm going to preview my liquid mesh. And let's change this to something like water. And so now we have this. This is pretty interesting. Let me change like my light intensity. And so we can kind of see that we've got this interesting little water preset here. And so now what I want is actually want whitewater to kind of come in here and do some stuff. So all you have to do is you drag off of the whitewater pen, and you can see here that we have some diagnostics. I can close that panel, and now we can kind of see all of our whitewater. And inside of this whitewater node is where you will be able to change, things like the radius. And so we could say, I want it to be like 0.5 centimeters. I can change the foam radius to be like 0.5. You can change your bubbles. So this is going to create, both bubbles, foam, and spray. So rather a trio of different things. And so we can kind of come in, change that too. And then if we want to increase, the amount of stuff that's actually happening, we can kind of change like our trapped air range. And then if we want, mostly trapped air, which is where this water kind of comes in and collides, we can increase that emission. And now you can see that we have a lot more bubbles and suds and stuff like that forming. We do not have like a full, I can't remember, I think it's like particle-based dynamics. So like PBD, I believe is what it's called. And that's where like all of our whitewater bubbles would kind of like collide with each other. It's going to make sure that there's no overlap and things like that. We do not have that feature just yet, but it is something that we want to add. But kind of the cool thing is that you can come in here and do like custom forces. So say if we wanted to add, maybe some more turbulence or something like that, we can kind of enforce more turbulence inside of this. Let me turn off that particular drain there. And so you can enforce things like more turbulence. I do wonder, because I haven't actually ever played with this, can I do like a high twist strength maybe? And let me see if this has any like force settings here. We've got like decay, we've got buoyancy, apply liquid forces, surface offset. So like how much higher in voxels is it from the wave surface and so on. So I figured that maybe you could like create some interesting whirlpool effects or something with this, but I don't foresee that actually happening. So maybe there's a bug here. I figured this would actually create like a whole, bunch of particles that advect with this. So I don't know, maybe it doesn't work. You can also do, custom drains for your whitewater. And so in this case, if you want an area where whitewater is, completely removed, like maybe right here, because maybe you have a mesh or something and you want to do that, maybe you have a custom collider that you don't want whitewater to go inside of, save on resources, you can add custom drains to that. And then of course we have a source. And so by default, if you plug in a whitewater node, what it's basically going to do is it's just saying like everywhere that there's a simulation I am going to try my best to calculate whitewater. And so that's more or less what that is going to do. But if you want, say, a specific source, you can come here, add a source, and then you could do, say, something like a shape mask. Now, by default, this is doing very similar things to the source tab here inside of the whitewater node. But what this is going to allow is you can say, hey, maybe in this particular area, wherever I have this shape, I want, say, like just an insane amount of stuff. And so like I can actually preview this shape, I do believe. Let's go here, whitewater, show appearance. Can you not preview a whitewater mask? Oh, yes, you can. It's in the source. So there we go. So say we've got that, and then I copy and paste. So this is kind of like a whitewater emitter. And then maybe here I want, no trapped air, but I want, full on as much wave crest stuff as I can get. And so then we can kind of come over here. And then if there's any wave crests in that area, it's going to create those wave crests. And so now you can see we have two different types of whitewater generation. And so you can really kind of go in and go through and do some interesting whitewater spawning if you really want to artistically control where it's happening and why it's happening and so on. And I do believe in the diagnostics panel, you can see if we go to the liquid tab, and let's just uncheck liquid particles, you can see that you can preview whitewater particles or not, but you can preview, say, a field. And then wherever it's yellow and blue, that is where it's actually spawning the whitewater actively. And so we can see that if we increase this shape, you can see all the different wave crests that it's starting to spawn stuff on. And if we lower it, you can see that it pretty much disappears. So this is a pretty good indicator of where your actual whitewater emitter is affecting. And this is a great way to debug that. Moving on, let's see. General forces. So you can plug in forces into the simulation node. Oh, just grabbed it. So let's say that we do a force line. This is the easiest thing to show. So if I plug this in here, you can see that it's starting to make this liquid rotate. It starts twisting by default right this second, but you can also do things like, say, push the liquid. You'll notice that we have a force constant that acts as gravity, and it has actual gravity values. So say if we turn this off and then we turn off our gravity force, we're not going to have any gravity, but if we turn this on, we can turn it on. You'll notice that the vast majority of our presets, unless there's something like zero gravity, they're going to have a force constant, and it's going to be the force of Earth's gravity. So that is pretty interesting. Somebody said, can you add a calendar to the water plane? I don't know what that means. Do you mean like a collider? We can come over here and take this collider, for instance, and split the water. Let's see. There you go. As if it were a rock. You can import your own mesh too. So say if you have cliffs and stuff like that and you want water to go down it, you can go through and actually do that. So yeah, so if you want to split the water, you can do it. And then we also have stickiness, which is probably affecting the flowiness of this. And then I think that we just have like a lower mesh quality here, and so that's why it's not showing all the particles. We could go into diagnostics and see how much mesh we're actually losing. And you can see that there's not really enough particles here to fully mesh, unfortunately. So it's not gonna show that too much. But yes, a cylinder. Okay, yeah, you can add a cylinder. You can do a number of different shapes. So we can kind of come over here, change this, and there you go. You've got kind of an interesting cylinder shape, and this can be any kind of input that you want. It can be, say, a hot dog if that's what you want it to be, or rocks or whatever. And then you'll notice that we also have a separate liquid appearance. So if you do want to change the liquid appearance to be, say, plastic or gold or iron and so on, you don't have to do that in the simulation node. You can do that here. But one thing that you can also do is if you have a singular appearance, you can also plug that same appearance into something like a collider. So if you want to, share materials between different colliders and things like that, we'll be able to do that. And then in the future, whenever we have like full dynamic variables in our particle sims, you'll be able to have, say, one emitter that's emitting, say a golden liquid, and then another one that's emitting like an iridescent liquid or water or whatever. And then you can mix those different liquids up is kind of the idea that we're going to go with. So that's why we're starting to, implement this appearance node. So that's also pretty interesting. Coming into, say, something like exports, I think that it's important to touch on that. So I think that the best thing for me to show is maybe something like the game flipbook. So if you're exporting to something like a game engine, you can see that we have our camera set up here. So this right here is the camera. You select your cameras up here. So we have camera 1 selected, which is this. And then you have to go through and kind of set your display resolution, your field of view if you want to change that, and so on. And so what you see here is what's actually going to be exported. And then if we go to, say, export image, if you want to add a number of passes, so let's say if we, also wanted to do thickness so that we can do like some fake, what is it called? Where the liquid, I just said it earlier, I can't remember what the name is, subsurface scattering. There we go. So if you want to fake like subsurface scattering and things like that, you can use like thickness, and let's say that we also want, maybe like a separate alpha channel for some reason. So, now we have like a render all rasterizer, we have thickness and alpha. And so it's going to put these different things into different flipbooks. And you can see that like in this case, maybe it would normally start out as RGB, but we have an alpha channel. We want to pack that into the same texture. You can grab this pin and do it. So this is kind of like a mini node graph for, packing custom textures. So, maybe there may be a instance here where maybe we, for whatever reason, maybe we wanted to store alpha, in the thickness as well. We can do that. We can delete the alpha or whatever. If you want to, if you don't want to do that anymore. So there's a number of cool things that you can do, and this is how you kind of add all of your different sources. We have a ton of different passes, maybe depth and so on. And so in this case, if I'm wanting to render a flipbook, I would choose flipbook. I can set the flipbook size, how many columns and rows that I want. I want an 8x8, so this is 64 frames. We can see here that the simulation isn't going to start packing by this blue line until frame 47. And then we want 64 frames. And then a frame stride means how many frames are we going to skip. And so this is kind of like a slow motion sim to kind of give us, a lot of cool like erosion and stuff of the liquid over time with the particle life. And so we kind of have it end here. And so this right here is enough. Let's set my directory. I'll just select stream builds, and then I'm going to export. So this right here is going to go ahead and export all of my different passes. And then now we are in the export tab, and we can see here, just barely, but this does have like a liquid thickness pass. We can go and preview, say, our depth channel, which is this. And then it's showing as red because depth is only one particular color. So if I select, say, just the red channel, you can see that it is grayscale. And so this is going to give me like the depth of my liquid from the camera. And then someone said, what's the minimum VRAM required for LiquiGen? I would say 8, probably just 8. Most scenes are pretty simple. Like in this case, this is 4.5 gigabytes. And then you choose the amount of resources that you want to commit to VRAM. So you can lower, say the amount of voxels. That's significantly going to affect, how much VRAM. And so you can kind of see, this right here is only using 2 gigabytes of VRAM for this particular sim, but it's going to tell me that I ran out of voxels. So, I maybe need to increase it a little bit until it stops or pauses. And so, yeah, this is 2.8 gigabytes. So I think that's pretty good to go in and tweak your resources. So this is meant for lower VRAM cards too. So going back to our export tab, and then you can also see that we have our render all. If I select all channels, you can see that this is our flipbook. We can go through, we can scrub, see if we like it. We can change the frame rate for playback, maybe 30 frames per second, whatever it happens to be. And then this is pretty cool because it shows our alpha channel and stuff like that as well. So that's kind of how you export. Exporting a sequence is also pretty much the same. You just come here, sequence, select, you can say, I want it to be 1080p. And then you say your first frame, number of frames, and so on. And so then if I exported this, it should have a playback as well inside of the export tab. And so now you can see this right here is our frames that we're loading from the hard drive. And if I select this, so this right here is our 1080p simulation. And then of course it worked with all of our other passes and stuff like that as well. And so you can go through and export all that. Now, of course, if I was doing, say, thickness and depth or something like that, I would probably come here, do RGBA, pack this, and remove that link so it doesn't make a texture. If the link here is disconnected, so like say if I select alpha right now from the drop down, it's going to say that there is no export, right? Because we don't actually have a link to it. And so that is pretty much that. So I guess let's kind of go through now that I've gone through like most of the nodes and what they do, which by the way, we do have a scene node, but it doesn't do anything currently. You have a skybox, directional light, and so on, but those are pretty self-explanatory. If you do want to export, say, a mesh, so say, Alembic or FBX, we also have vertex animated textures. So if you're in games, this is how you export that. You can choose Mesh Flipbook, which Mesh Flipbooks, what they do is it basically takes the whole simulation that you see here. So it would take all of this stuff, it would pack it into one singular FBX. Each frame would be offset by the vertex colors alpha channel, I believe. And then in your shader in game, you can discard any other vertex color other than the frame you're currently on, and you would be able to play this back really, really efficiently. And so instead of having, say, a mesh that you load and, maybe a vertex animated texture, you can do all of that in one singular mesh. And so that's what this mesh flipbook option is. And so that is pretty cool. Marcus says, can you pour liquid from an animating tipping vessel to another? Yes. So let's go ahead and actually start making some stuff. And so I'll run through maybe a couple of examples. Maybe we'll do, let me just type on my other screen so that I remember. We'll do a tipping vessel. We will do a whirlpool, and then we'll do, maybe some kind of like a super viscous goo or something like that. And then if you want to do any kind of other sim, like I said, we have a ton of presets that you can go through, whether it's, say like lava eruptions, or it's, like a swirl for like a product ad, or, you have super viscous stuff. You want to do like some kind of pool effect with like a boat going through it or something. I did see that somebody said, like, can you simulate giant waves in the ocean? Not really. I would highly recommend you just use like an ocean modifier or something like that in Blender to do that until we have that kind of stuff inside of our simulations. But you can see that this is a pretty large scale simulation. And if you look at our trailer for LiquiGen on our YouTube channel, you'll see that we actually had a scene where there's a boat going through the ocean. And so if you're far enough away, this right here can look like a really, really giant ocean sim. And you can see that this is, probably, I don't know, 50 something meters wide. So this is a gigantic simulation. So it's just up to you and how you use perspective to kind of fake various scales. So anyway, we're going to do a new project. We'll just start from scratch here. And I think the first thing I want to do is say a tipping vessel. And I'm going to say that that's probably pretty small. So let's do like 0.005 for my voxel size. And then for my emitter, I'm going to do like 0.1 meter. So something really quite small, maybe like 0.05 even. And then inside of my collider here, I do wonder, can we do a hollow tube? I don't know if we can. And if we can't, that's fine. I will just have to fake it. Yeah, I think I'll fake it with this torus here. And so we'll just see here. So we'll go here. I'm going to take this and do something like this. And then I'm going to add in another shape. And then I'm going to do, so this is a very roundabout way because, actually, let me just choose cylinder real quick. And actually, yeah, because we can't do a hollow thing that doesn't have an end because we don't have blending shapes. This is, Jason, I know you're watching. This is one of the rare cases where I do wish that I could just blend some sign distance fields together and make a hollow shape. I do think we should probably add like a tube option or something like that. So anyway, I'm going to try my best to animate this stuff together. And so what I would do is I'm going to select this, zero out the position, kind of drag this up like so, and then change my rotation like so, change my Z rotation to 0. We'll have this, and then let's go ahead and change my maximum radius. I'm really fudging all this stuff. So let's maybe just grab this like this. And we're going to imagine that this is a tipping object, okay? I'm just really faking this here because I don't have a like an empty bottle mesh or something offhand, though I probably should. So let's do like 0.1, and so now we have this. And so if you want to do, say, just a fill operation on your emitter, it's just a one-time burst, you can kind of do this. So you choose emission mode to fill. We can say volume or surface only, which we're going to do volume. And then I'm probably going to change this to a cylinder. I'm going to choose my height to be like 0.2, and then my radius. We're going to drag this down, something like that. That's probably too much. Let's do like a 0.1 for my height. 0.1, not the camera. 0.1. And so now we've got something like this. And then let's imagine that this tip over here is the actual, let's say like the actual spout or something. So I'm just going to kind of move this, and we're going to imagine that this is pouring out, right? And so now you can kind of see that that liquid is pouring. And, you know, maybe for a liquid of this scale or something, maybe we want, you know, a little bit more surface tension or something. So we can go over here, we can say surface tension. Let's kind of increase this value quite a bit. That's too much. So just kind of go down until it looks decent. You know, maybe something like this. Kind of change the scale a little bit. So there, it's kind of interesting. So yeah, just imagine that is tipping. we have to use our imagination today, but you can see that you can have something that goes, it stops, it goes, it stops. You can push the liquid and so on. So it does react very well to moving colliders and things like that. So that would be interesting. So I think that's pretty much it for something like a splash. We just have to imagine that I have hollow shapes, and maybe if we want like a container that it's pouring into, maybe we do something like this. There you go. And so now we've kind of poured it into this container. And it's going to try its best to conserve volume and things like that and not sink down and whatever. And that kind of goes back to my pressure solver, or if I lower this, you can see the liquid is just going to sink down immediately. And so that's kind of where pressure and more iterations and stuff like that come in. If you really need to conserve volume for, you know, a liquid bottle or something like that, you know, maybe increasing your pressure iterations and playing with over relaxation and the solver tuner is probably going to yield good results. So going in, why don't we do something like a whirlpool now? So this right here is going to be a rather larger simulation. So we can see that we're kind of at the 10-meter scale by default here. I think what we should do is we're going to choose a cylinder, and then we're going to revert our position, and we're going to revert our rotation. I'm going to change the height to maybe be something like 10 meters. I'm going to change my radius to be, you know, let's say like 5 meters or something. And then for the collider, I am going to do an invert shape so that now we have everything kind of stay within this actual bounding box that I've created for this. So LiquiGen is sparse. So, you know, you could come in and say if we turn this collider off, you know, if I move this around and I kill my drain, you know, LiquiGen doesn't necessarily have any true bounds. It does, once you reach like your VRAM limit, the liquid will just kind of stop. And by the way, if you ever run into a problem where your liquid explodes like this, it means that you need more triangles, most likely. So you can go into resources, increase the number of triangles, and that would prevent that issue that you just saw. Just meant that we ran out of triangles. So anyway, going back to the collider here, let's go ahead and grab this. We're going to select, say, a cylinder as well. I'm going to choose probably a 4.9 radius. I'm just going to zero this out, something like this. And then it says that the maximum amount of particles has been reached. So let me go ahead and increase my number of particles. But let me just do a fill operation and see. And there may be a situation in which I need to change this to be like maybe like 0.1 in size, maybe a 0.08. There we go. And so now we don't necessarily need as many particles, but we can kind of keep going down a little bit until we have a pretty good amount. Maybe 1 million or something is fine. So now if we want the actual force field for this whirlpool, we can add in a force line. And now you can see that it is doing some pretty insane stuff here. So we can just do like 0.2 for my twist strength maybe. And then I'm definitely going to want to turn off the show my shape. And then I'm also going to want to, once again, lower this value. Let's do like 0.02 maybe. Let's do like 0.05, 0.1, 0.1. Yeah, maybe something like that. And then I'm also seeing my actual emitter as well. So there we go. Now we kind of have a cool whirlpool effect. We can add in, say, white water. So wherever there's wave crests and stuff like that, we're going to start seeing the white water happen. I would probably add in some turbulence here to kind of break up the shape. And so maybe we do something like that. We don't need that much turbulence. We can lower the strength quite a bit, I think. And so, yeah, so this right here is giving us a pretty interesting whirlpool effect. We could do something like maybe a negative push strength. See how that affects it. What if we do like -10? So it's going to kind of create like a dimple here in the middle, maybe. And so we can kind of play with like, say, things like, the repel strength. We can play with the push strength if we want to push away from the center. There's a number of different like fall off options and stuff that we have. We could also choose, say, to have a fall off, and then we could lower this down to maybe something like this, reduce our push strength, reset the sim, and then really just increase our twist strength here. And then it'll eventually start kind of pulling in the rest of the liquid, and you can increase this fall off radius to kind of determine, how much of a crazy simulation you want or whatever. We do have some pretty cool, more fine-tuned whirlpool presets, but it is interesting to just kind of come in here, see what this kind of stuff is doing live. Lorenzo says, can you export the whitewater to something like Blender? Absolutely. Absolutely. You would come here, you would do particles, export particles, uncheck main liquid, spray foam bubbles. And then that's going to export as an alembic. And then you can take those points and then add, like real bubble meshes and stuff like that to it to have their own custom shader, because it would only export just points because these are 2D sprites. And so, but you can see that we do differentiate between, say, bubbles, foam, and then the mist that's kind of flying around and stuff like that. But I think that we probably got a much better result from our whirlpool here by just kind of playing around with something like this with a full twist strength that affects the whole liquid. So that's pretty interesting. I am curious because Jason in our chat made these different whirlpools, and it looks like we have multiple forces. It looks like there is a fall off that's happening. We have some push strength, some repel strength, and so on. Yeah. And then a much higher volume of liquid as well. It looks like the size here is 0.3, and he was using about 5 million particles. The cool thing is you can actually go in and kind of see, maybe if we path trace this, see the inside of the liquid, which I think is really cool. And we can turn off the denoiser here. You can kind of see this. And our path tracer is actually rather fast. It just takes a little bit of time to come together. And so path tracer is definitely cool. Just don't use it in the preview tab because it'll crash your software, which is what I found out earlier. And so that's kind of showing off, say the tipping vessel, the whirlpool. Sorry, I didn't have like a bottle or something to use. And then we have, say, goo. So let's say if I wanted to actually make goo, I'll come here, choose this. Actually, I'm going to start from a default small trickle, because this is something that's a very small scale, and our default viscosity values will work. And so you'll notice here, by the way, that we have, say, like a lifetime range, and we have a dynamic viscosity, and it has these little error issues. LiquiGen does do a better job of telling you about errors and issues. Unlike Embergen, which hopefully Embergen 2 will tell you better stuff, but you can hover over it and it'll say, hey, this has no effect, because you actually need to check, the box. And the cool thing is if you click the error, it will take you to the parameter that you need to activate. And so now that you can see, now that we have activated the viscosity, we have this pretty cool little goo fountain thing from our starting point that we had. But what I want to do is I want to not emit a bunch of stuff here. I want to keep my emitter probably the size that it is, and then I'm going to make sure that the activity is not animated. I don't want it to be animated. I just want it to stay as is. And then I'm going to go ahead and say increase my viscosity coefficient. Let's just type in something crazy like 100,000. And then I'm going to change, say, my actual viscosity iterations, maybe kind of do like 0.05 for my target error. And so now we're starting to get something that's more like a goo. And then, of course, the smaller our emitter is, the smaller our stream will be, and then the more curly it'll be as well. And so now if we kind of have something like this, now we have a really curly little liquid. And then if you'll notice that, like, if you change things like the emission height and things like that, you change the emission diameter, you'll be able to get different results on, whether the liquid is like actually coiling and things like that. So like this. So now it's actually doing a circle, and that's all just kind of based on, the dynamics of, how is it piling up? What is your viscosity coefficient? And so on. So there's a lot of different stuff. And then, of course, if we're going to make it goo, we need to change the appearance. So maybe I'll choose something like plastic as my my default thing here. Let's change the color to something like green. And then we also have a cool parameter that is interesting, and that's going to be like rim reflective color. So if I wanted this to like kind of show like maybe more of a red color or something like that on the edge, you can kind of see it kind of here a little bit. You can do that kind of thing as well. And so we have like transmission color, which is, what the liquid would be if you could see through it. So now you can kind of see some of that red refraction and stuff from the transmission color. So some interesting stuff, but that's kind of how you make a goo. And then of course you can interact with it live. So if we come here, we add another collider, we add in, say, why don't we actually import something? Let's do here, we'll do meshes, we'll say mac and cheese, and then let's change the transform master scale, something way smaller, even smaller, way smaller. There we go. So now we got this macaroni bowl, and now we can just kind of fly right into it. It could probably be a little bit bigger than that. Something like this. Okay, that's huge scale. There we go. Put it all in my macaroni. We can actually change it to be cheese. There we go. Something like that. So this is kind of how you would do this kind of thing. It's pretty interesting to be able to simulate this. And then you can export it to pretty much anything that you want. Let's see. Lorenzo says, is it possible to do a second simulation for ultra detailed interactions like very fine concrete pores? I mean, you can change, your voxel size and things like that. But like you can't do like two different types of simulation necessarily in the same thing, unless you came in here and did like, say, an emitter. Maybe we did let's just copy and paste this shape since it's the same size. We'll kind of drag this off, something like this. And then, we just have something like continuous generation, and then increase our flow rate maybe. And now you can see that like this liquid is just kind of like pouring through. and it's kind of piling up at the bottom down there in the bowl. And so like it's two different viscosities, but I'm not sure if that fixes what you say or what you're asking for. So it says, how about boiling water? We might could do something like boiling water. Let me just choose the whirlpool preset since it kind of starts as a thing. We'll turn off the force line here. And then if I was doing like bubbling water, maybe I would do like a bias or something. Maybe like this, but we need to make sure that we have, does this have a mask on it? I'm not sure. Maybe that's happening because I have such a high bias here. So there you go, like this right here could potentially start bubbling, but what I would probably recommend if you want like more of a bubbling effect, which I don't know what's happening, why it's still going into the center. Oh, I think it's because we have a drain. Duh. Okay. Yeah, so if you want like a bubbling effect, you could potentially use something like an animated turbulence value. So we could say, come here, we've got our turbulence. I'm gonna turn the other one off. We can do like a higher strength. We can animate this speed. And so this right here could potentially be like a bubbling effect if you can tweak it right. You can see that it is creating a lot of bubbles too. Um, so, you have to change kind of like your scale. Um, just kind of depends on what you do, your strength, and so on. I haven't ever done boiling water, so I'm just kind of estimating here. I don't know. That kind of looks like it. Otherwise, I would suggest you animate a bunch of spheres or something in another tool and bring those in as colliders, and then just kind of have them loop through the simulation if you want to do that. For future features of ocean and river tools, what can we expect and what time frame? On the roadmap, it says delayed, so I have no clue when we could expect that. But the gist would be it would just be flat planes, and we'll do a different simulation type. It won't have particles or anything like that. It'll just be simulations on a mesh. Is kind of the idea for that. Let's see. Somebody else says, going back to mesh exports, is there a way to control the mesh resolution for VATs of the vertex colored FBX files? This would be for export to game engines. We can't really tune that. So let me just like maybe take this like wall splat or something, because this is more like game oriented for a decal or something. If we go to the diagnostics here, and then we show, let me do liquid mesh, but a field. We want to see the triangles individually. So in this case, let me go to mesh. We're not using high quality meshing. So I think the first thing is you don't want to use high quality meshing. And then you can lower things like say the ISO value to kind of get that. But other than that, we don't really have any way to tweak this other than say just like particle counts and things like that. In the future, we do want to be able to do like say additional decimation, because right now this is 495,000 triangles, and maybe that's too much, right? And so it just kind of depends. Looks like 486,000 kind of at the end there. And the beginning is like 690,000. So that's not probably necessarily super performant. In the future, we want to have decimation. I think that it is probably, for JC, it's probably more likely that we have decimation in LiquiGen first. And I would recommend once we have that to just take your, maybe your mesh and stuff like that into LiquiGen, and then you can bake out a more proper like VAT and stuff like that whenever we get those features in for decimation. But I hope it can come to LiquiGen pretty soon. Somebody said, is it possible to bake the simulation for preview? No, it is not possible. The only way that you can do that is if you export an image sequence, and then you can preview it in the export tab itself. And then so you can preview the image sequence, but you cannot bake the actual liquid. It's all on the GPU, and we only calculate per frame. So, Dog Stew says, is there a way to leave residue from where the liquid hits? For example, the splatter on the wall, if you change the stickiness so that it starts to drip down, can you leave a bit of residue? Yes. So, well, I'll say more or less, right? Like we don't have like a wet map type thing just yet. So let me turn off diagnostics. We will choose say, does this force line? Let's do this. We'll do another force line. We will change it. Actually, let's do force constant because that's going to be gravity. So something like this, you can see that it is leaving a residue because of our stickiness. So if you have, say, 100% stickiness, that means that at least some of the particles are going to stick at some, pretty good rate. And one thing we could do here in this particular case is I would actually animate the gravity. So I would say, do this, press shift to add a key, and we'll say it's not enabled. And then I'm going to press Z to step through the simulation. Let's see, and just keep stepping through. And then I think maybe enabling it, just trying to see when I want to actually enable the gravity force. There you go, something like that, maybe a frame 80. And so then it kind of comes through, it splats, and then you can kind of time that to be just right for whenever it goes down, probably like maybe here. But you could also like ramp up the gravity as well so that it's not like instantaneous. But hopefully that answers your question. So yeah, you can absolutely have residue. And if you have a preset like this where the sim is just kind of like looping around, you can come here and I believe, actually, let me see. I should have a timeline button where that turns off, but I don't actually know where that is. Jason, if you're in the chat and you know how to turn off looping here, let me know. I don't actually know how to turn off the repeat frame thing. I don't see it on the timeline anywhere. I don't see a button for it. I don't see. Maybe it's this reset simulation. There we go. Okay. Yeah, so you can reset the simulation at a certain time. I wish that there was a thing over here to kind of change that. But anyway, so yes, you can do that. All right. Even I learned stuff on stream sometime. I don't know every single thing about every tool that we have, but I know the vast majority. So just in the chat, I am curious, like, was this this stream helpful? I kind of talked about, most of the more like really technical stuff, because I think that's the most important thing because we have so many different presets and things like that that actually show you, kind of the various settings you would need to build a lot of different effect types. And so, but I showed you the gist of kind of everything, I think, and we showed off, how to make a couple of examples. It's kind of, difficult to pack everything into like a singular hour. I mean, we could go on for hours and hours. It's like, how do I pour something out of a bottle? How do I, make goo? How do I make this thing? How do I do this? And I think the simple answer is what you should do is get a cup on your desk and put water in it and then pour it into another cup. And then the thing is if you set up the basic parameters for something to be water in LiquiGen, and then you have a digital cup and a digital glass that you're pouring it into, and then you tip it over, the simulation is just going to do what it should do, like in real life. You know what I mean? So like LiquiGen in and of itself, like in like simulation theory, very, very simple. It is a very simple tool. Maybe some things like say maybe like these wave makers, they are a bit more complex. But you can see that in this case, if we show this, the way that this works is we just have a block, right? It's a collider, and we're just pushing through the simulation, and that's going to give us these big waves and stuff like that. So it's really quite simple. And then like everything else that's happening here, it's just pure simulation settings, right? Like the solver is doing the vast majority of the hard work for you. You just have to set up the initial conditions for it to actually happen. You have to set up the ongoing conditions for something to actually happen. Is kind of the gist. And so, Abby says, I'll be looking forward to use these in my Unreal projects. So yeah, if you use it in Unreal, I would highly, highly suggest if you want a 3D version, use Vertex Animated Textures or Mesh Flipbooks. We will have an article coming out on our website soon for Mesh Flipbooks, how to use them. We'll probably have some shader demos and stuff like that, or message us on Discord, and I'm sure me and Jason can get you an example of how to actually use Mesh Flipbooks. It's a great, great way to get stuff in your game. Or you go through and you actually export a flipbook and you put that on particle sprites in something like Niagara, and that is going to be the most performant way to do this kind of stuff. Carl says USD support. Jason did answer you, but USD support is planned. We just don't know when it's coming exactly. It's a very, very complicated format, and we cannot use the library as it exists. We have to rebuild everything from scratch because most libraries are too obtuse, I'll say, for us to implement. They're not very performant, so we have to kind of reverse engineer the format. We have reverse engineered it to some degree internally, but we don't actually have an importer for any of our individual tools for that. So yeah, go through, check out a lot of our various presets. Join our Discord if you haven't. And I'm glad that everybody liked this. Hopefully this gets you, pretty kick-started into LiquiGen. It is very simple. You look at some node graphs like this and you may be scared, but it's pretty simple. It's like, okay, these right here are my colliders. This is what they look like. This right here is a drain, which kills particles. This is the appearance for my liquid. This right here determines where and how much liquid I'm actually putting into the simulation. This is our gravity force. This right here is our sunlight. So if you want more or less sun, you can do that. If you want to change your HDRI, you can do that inside of this. So we'll say, let's do maybe sky 2, see how that looks. Really cool. Changes the look of your sim, gives it a much more realistic look. Scene doesn't really do anything. It just is an aggregation node to kind of grab all of your stuff. And then you've got your render node, which, kind of says, how many samples are you putting into, say, your rasterizer. So if you want, smoother rendering, less anti-aliasing and things, you can increase the samples. And then you have path tracer settings. And then finally, you have your export nodes. So like I said, it's pretty self-explanatory. You can also hover over nodes, and it'll tell you what they do. So there's a lot of tool tips and things if you don't know what they are. And then we have official documentation coming out soon. And if you want to clean your node graph, select everything, Alt-A, and that'll clean your graph for you. So pretty cool stuff. I think that's going to be the end of the stream. Like I said, if you have questions, email us at support@jengfx.com or join our Discord, and we're happy to help you. We'll talk to you later.